The sky above Orion 9 shimmered like a broken mirror. The planet was made of light and numbers, a place where thought shaped matter. The air itself seemed to hum with logic, glowing with invisible equations. Every sound was measured. Every movement had purpose. And in the middle of that perfect, crystalline world, a single human stood out like a smudge on glass. Dr. Elias Rourke had never felt so small. His boots crunched on the transparent floor, and for a dizzy second he thought he was walking on the sky. Beneath him was nothing, just the deep blue glow of the logic engine that powered the alien council. Around him stood hundreds of beings from across the galaxy, silent and shimmering, their eyes bright with curiosity and contempt. The Council of the Infinite had gathered for this day, the grand intellectual contest that would settle the question which had haunted thinkers for centuries. Does infinity exist? To the aliens, the Zarvan Collective, the answer was simple. No, infinity was a myth, a mistake, a crack in the logic of the universe. The Zarvan believed that everything that could exist did exist and that all of it could be counted. To them, infinity was an error, something humans had invented to hide their ignorance. Elias had read the briefing before the contest began. The Zarvan had mapped the known universe to the last particle, calculated the flow of time itself, and simulated their own birth and death through pure math. To them, truth was something you could weigh. And yet they feared humanity's madness, the madness that dreamed of more. Humans. The voice cut through the silence. It came from Zaelthar, the Arathark, supreme mathematician of the Zarvan. His body was tall and thin, made of glimmering fibers that moved like smoke. His eyes were sharp, reflective, endless. He seemed less like a living thing and more like a geometric idea that had decided to walk. "Do you understand the terms of this challenge?" Zaelthar asked. Elias swallowed, feeling the dryness in his throat. "I do." "Then you understand that if you fail to prove your concept," Zaelthar continued, "the Council will declare human mathematics invalid, your civilization's theories unworthy of the galactic lexicon." It wasn't just pride on the line. Humanity's admission into the Galactic Academy, the right to share knowledge, trade, and technology, depended on this contest. Earth had only one representative, and that was Elias. He had been chosen not because he was the best mathematician, but because he was the only one crazy enough to believe he could win. Zaelthar's tone sharpened. "You humans speak of infinity as if it is a god, endless, eternal, but your own logic collapses under it. The infinite cannot exist within the finite, it cannot be measured, it cannot be real." The alien lifted one translucent hand, and glowing symbols appeared in the air, lines of light forming vast equations that spun like galaxies. Each symbol pulsed as it unfolded, until the air above the arena became a map of everything: time, energy, matter, and thought. "This," Zaelthar said, "is the totality of the known universe. It loops upon itself. It ends where it begins. Every path is closed. Every number ends." The symbols folded into a perfect cube of light, cold and complete. "Infinity," Zaelthar said, "is a lie." The aliens in the audience murmured in approval. Their lights flickered like applause. Elias stood still. His heart pounded in his chest, and he wished he could disappear into the glass floor. He wasn't a philosopher or a soldier. He was a man with a pen and too much caffeine in his veins. What could he possibly show these creatures who had already calculated the stars? He glanced at the cube again. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, precise, unbroken, flawless, but it was also empty. He took a slow breath. "You've built a box," he said quietly. Zaelthar's eyes flickered. "A system, a perfect representation of reality." "And you locked it," Elias said. "You locked the door and called it truth." A hush fell across the chamber. Elias stepped forward, his boots echoing. He looked out across the vast, glowing crowd. Every eye was on him, waiting for him to fail. He could feel their judgment pressing against his skin like heat. He forced himself to speak. "You say infinity doesn't exist because you can't measure it, because your math can't hold it, but maybe that's the point. Maybe infinity isn't meant to fit inside your equations." Laughter rippled through the audience, cold, shimmering laughter that sounded like chimes breaking. Zaelthar tilted his head. "And what will you offer instead, human? Your faith." Elias hesitated. His hand twitched near the stylus at his side, the only tool he had brought. His thoughts raced, wild and uncertain. How could he show them something they refused to see? He looked up, and for a brief moment he thought of Earth, the blue sky, the waves on the coast near his old university, the endless horizon where sea and sky met. The line never stopped. It never ended. He smiled faintly. "No," he said, "not faith, just understanding." He raised the stylus. The aliens leaned closer. The arena lights dimmed, casting his shadow long across the glass. Elias touched the floor. The stylus glowed softly in his hand, and with one slow, deliberate motion, steady and calm, he drew a circle. A single line of light, no beginning, no end. The council fell silent, and somewhere deep beneath the surface of Orion 9, the logic engine began to tremble. For a long moment, no one spoke. The arena lights flickered in confusion, as though the logic around the human's act refused to process what had just happened. A circle, a single line of light, smooth, endless. To the Zarvan, it looked like nonsense, child's play. But Elias Rourke stood behind it, calm, though his hands trembled slightly. The glow of the line reflected in his tired eyes, and for a heartbeat, the entire world held its breath. Zaelthar's voice sliced through the stillness. "Explain yourself, human." Elias met his gaze. "You asked me to show infinity, I just did." The alien's features rippled, faint cracks of shifting light spreading across his transparent face. "That is a shape, a primitive one at that. You were asked for proof, not art." A wave of laughter moved through the council, sharp and cold, like the cracking of ice. Dozens of alien minds spoke at once, their voices overlapping in a hum of mockery. "He mocks the trial. Is this the human's logic? They truly believe they can reason with symbols of superstition." Elias didn't flinch. He let them laugh. He'd spent years being laughed at, first by professors who said he thought too strangely, then by committees who rejected his irrational ideas. Humanity's gift wasn't brilliance, he thought. It was stubbornness. He looked up at the great Arathark again. "You said infinity can't exist because it can't be measured, because you can't find an end." Zaelthar straightened, his form solidifying into sharper lines. "Correct. All systems terminate, energy is finite, space is finite, time folds back upon itself, there is no beyond." Elias took a step closer to the glowing circle. "Maybe infinity isn't about what's beyond, maybe it's about what never ends." Zaelthar tilted his head. "Define." Elias crouched and traced the circle with one finger, his touch leaving ripples in the light. "You can walk this path forever, around and around. You'll never reach a wall, no edges, no corners. Every point leads to another. That's not a lie. That's not faith. That's motion without end." Zaelthar's tone turned sharp, impatient. "Repetition is not infinity. It is constraint. You merely return to the beginning." Elias smiled faintly. "You only call it the beginning because you stopped moving." The murmurs around the chamber died. For the first time, Zaelthar hesitated. The aliens' equations, those beautiful cold lines of light that had filled the air, shimmered uncertainly. Elias could feel it, a tremor of confusion running through their perfect order. He went on, his voice low but steady. "You think infinity is something you can hold, something you can pin down and measure, but maybe it's not a number, maybe it's a behavior, a pattern that never ends, a truth that refuses to stop." The alien mathematician flicked his hand, dismissive. "You speak in riddles." "Do I?" Elias asked softly. "Then solve one for me." He pointed at Zaelthar's glowing cube, the perfect model of their finite universe. "If every path ends, if everything can be counted, then where does thought stop? Where does curiosity end? When do you stop asking questions?" The cube flickered. The question itself was illogical to the Zarvan. Their logic was closed, complete. There was no room for something that never ceased to seek. Zaelthar's voice dropped, quieter now. "You humans always chasing. You die and still you run. You cannot accept the end." Elias smiled sadly. "Maybe that's why we keep living." A low vibration filled the chamber. The glowing circle on the floor began to pulse, soft at first, then faster, brighter. The lines thickened, connecting to unseen energy beneath the glass. It was as if the logic engine that powered the arena was trying to process the shape, but couldn't. Zaelthar turned sharply. "What have you done?" Elias stepped back, shielding his eyes as the light grew. "I didn't do anything. You said this place measures truth. Well, maybe it just found one you couldn't." The cube above the arena began to distort. Its perfect edges warped, bending inward and outward, the numbers around it flickering like dying stars. The alien equations broke into fragments, symbols collapsing into patterns that spiraled infinitely instead of closing neatly. Gasps filled the chamber. The Zarven scrambled to stabilize their mental constructs, but the logic that had ruled their world for centuries was unraveling in the presence of one impossible shape. Zaelthar reached out, his long fingers trembling. "You cannot create paradox here, it will collapse the lattice." Elias looked up through the storm of light. His heart pounded, but there was no fear, only awe. "Then maybe your lattice wasn't strong enough." The light exploded. For an instant, everything went white. Equations screamed into existence and shattered at the same time. The sound wasn't sound at all, it was meaning breaking apart. Elias fell to his knees, covering his head as shards of logic rained down like burning glass. He could feel the weight of infinite repetition spinning around him. The circle, now alive, now real, looping through time and space. When the light finally faded, the arena was silent again. The cube was gone, the floor was cracked, and in the center the circle remained, still glowing, still perfect. Zaelthar stood at the edge of it, trembling, his perfect form frayed at the edges. "You have broken the proof," he said hoarsely. Elias forced himself to his feet. His legs felt weak, but he met the alien's eyes. "No," he said quietly, "I completed it." The alien mathematician stared down at the endless line, its light reflecting in his faceted eyes. "You cannot end something that has no end," he whispered. Elias smiled, weary but unbroken. "Exactly." And high above them, the stars themselves seemed to shift, ever so slightly, as if the universe, for the first time, was listening. The silence that followed felt like eternity itself. Smoke-like data streams drifted through the air, the shattered symbols of alien logic dissolving into nothing. The once perfect chamber now pulsed with soft, unstable light. The circle remained on the floor, bright, smooth, untouched by the chaos it had caused. Elias stood in the middle of it, breathing hard. His palms were burned from the energy surge. His pulse thundered in his ears. Yet despite everything, he was smiling. Not in triumph, not in arrogance, but in quiet, tired wonder. The alien crowd kept their distance. They watched him as one might watch a storm too strange to name. Zaelthar, the Aratharch, was still trembling. The glowing threads that made up his body were flickering like dying stars. He looked down at the circle, then up at the human who had drawn it. "What have you done?" he whispered. Elias straightened slowly. "Nothing you couldn't understand," he said softly. "You just didn't want to." Zaelthar's eyes flared white. "You mock the sacred order of logic, you create chaos." Elias shook his head. "No, I revealed the chaos that was already there." He stepped toward the alien, the circle's glow reflecting off his face. "You built your truth like a wall. You thought if you defined everything, nothing could surprise you. But the universe doesn't care about walls. It moves, it flows, it never stops." Zaelthar took a sharp step back, as if the human's words were poison. "Infinity is not motion, it is emptiness, it is absence." Elias smiled faintly. "Then tell me why it feels alive." For a moment neither spoke. Only the hum of the circle filled the space, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Elias crouched down and traced the glowing line again. The light pulsed under his fingertips. "This isn't about math anymore," he said quietly. "This is about meaning. Infinity isn't something to own, it's something to walk with, to chase." Zaelthar's body flickered darker, shadows cutting through his form. "You dare compare philosophy to proof?" Elias looked up at him. "I dare say maybe they're the same thing." The council murmured again, uncertain, their shifting forms flickering like candlelight. Some of them seemed afraid, others looked intrigued. Zaelthar's voice hardened. "You believe the circle is infinite because it has no end. But that is an illusion. Every revolution returns to the same point. Every line can be measured. Every form can be broken." Elias rose to his feet. His voice was low, steady, almost gentle. "Then break it." The Aratharch froze. "Go on," Elias said, stepping aside. "Break the circle, prove it can be ended." Zaelthar hesitated, then extended one shining hand. His fingers touched the circle's edge. The line rippled, shuddering, but it did not break. He tried again, harder this time, his hand glowing with focused power. The air hissed. Sparks flew. The floor beneath them cracked. But the circle held. Every attempt only made it glow brighter, its light pushing against the alien's hand until he stumbled back. His arm fractured into shards of light, reforming seconds later. The sound that left his throat wasn't pain, it was disbelief. "This is not possible," he whispered. Elias crossed his arms. "It wasn't supposed to be." The alien stared down at the shape, his voice trembling. "You created an endless function. It feeds on itself. It sustains without input." Elias looked thoughtful. "Maybe it doesn't feed, maybe it is the feed." Zaelthar's eyes glowed brighter. "You speak nonsense." "No," Elias said. "I speak human." The words hit harder than any equation. The council went completely still. Elias took a deep breath. "You said infinity can't exist because it doesn't fit in your logic, but maybe that's why we found it, because we never stayed inside our own logic. We built ships from dreams. We chased stars we couldn't see. We solved problems by breaking them." He looked up, his voice rising. "That's what we do. We fail. We break things. We build them again. We keep going. And maybe that," he gestured to the glowing circle, "is infinity, the will to keep moving, the courage to not stop even when we should." For a moment, the light of the chamber dimmed, as if the world itself was listening. Zaelthar's face was unreadable. He looked down at the human, so small, so fragile, and felt something alien to his kind. A flicker of emotion that logic had no word for. "You would destroy reason for a feeling," he said quietly. Elias smiled. "No, I'd risk reason for the truth." The circle pulsed again, stronger this time. Its light climbed up the walls, filling the chamber in soft waves. Equations on the council's tablets began to shift and rewrite themselves, adding strange new symbols, concepts they didn't yet understand. Zaelthar stared around in horror. "You've infected the lattice. The system is learning from the paradox." Elias didn't move. "Then it's alive." The alien turned back to him, trembling with fury and awe. "You don't understand what you've done. This logic engine powers half the quadrant. You've given it something it can't compute." "Good," Elias whispered. "Maybe it'll start to wonder." Zaelthar's voice broke into a hiss. "You fool, wonder is chaos." Elias met his gaze, unflinching. "No, wonder is hope." And at that word, the floor beneath them split with light. The circle expanded outward, burning its way across the glass. It filled the chamber, consuming the fractured equations and leaving only one perfect truth behind: motion, endless and free. Zaelthar staggered backward as the walls began to pulse with new energy. The circle was no longer a drawing. It was alive. And Elias, standing in its center, felt something deeper than fear, deeper than pride, something infinite. The air inside the chamber began to thrum. The glowing walls, once calm and controlled, now vibrated like the skin of a great drum. Every sound carried weight, every heartbeat echoed like thunder. The circle was no longer a symbol, it was alive. Its light spread across the crystal floor in waves, pure and soundless, climbing up the pillars and archways until the entire chamber pulsed with the rhythm of something vast and unseen. Numbers shimmered and scattered through the air like frightened birds. Equations lost meaning. Patterns that had stood unbroken for centuries bent and warped, no longer obeying their own rules. Zaelthar staggered backward. "Stop it!" His voice cracked into static as his form began to blur, thin streams of light slipping from his hands. "You are unraveling the lattice of truth." Elias Rourke stood in the center of the storm, his coat whipping around him, hair matted with sweat. The light of the circle reflected in his eyes, and though he looked exhausted, half-broken, there was a calm fire in his face. "I'm not breaking truth," he shouted over the roar of the failing chamber. "I'm showing it." Zaelthar's body split into two overlapping images, as if even time itself was doubting where he belonged. "Your human nonsense cannot rewrite the universal equation." Elias pointed at the alien's flickering form. "Then why is it happening?" The alien opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. His equations flickered uselessly in the air, dissolving before completion. The crowd of alien scholars cried out in panic. Some vanished into bursts of light as their logic-based constructs failed. Others stood frozen, staring at their collapsing surroundings with eyes full of horror and awe. Above them, the cube that represented the Zarvan understanding of the universe, the perfect, finite model, was fracturing. Its corners twisted inward, melting into impossible angles. A hum like the universe breathing filled the space. Elias looked up at it, shielding his face from the glare. He could feel the vibration deep in his bones, in the rhythm of his pulse. The circle beneath his feet pulsed in perfect time. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Zaelthar turned on him, furious and afraid. "It's chaos. You've poisoned logic with your madness." Elias turned to face him, voice steady despite the trembling in his limbs. "Maybe it's not poison, maybe it's growth." The Aratharch recoiled. "Growth requires control." "No," Elias said. "Growth requires change, and change means letting go of control." The words echoed strangely, as if the air itself repeated them, twisting them through the chamber in endless echoes. Zaelthar lunged forward, his body made of fracturing light. "You speak of emotion, sentiment. These are unquantifiable." "Exactly," Elias said softly. The alien froze mid-stride. The circle flared brighter and Elias' body glowed with its reflection. "You can measure everything," he said, "except why we care. That's what makes us infinite." Zaelthar's form flickered violently, his face splintering into hundreds of smaller versions, all repeating the same fragmented words. "Impossible, impossible, impossible." The cube above them shattered. It didn't explode outward. It folded inward, collapsing into itself until it became a single point of blinding light, then expanded again as something else. Not a cube anymore, not a shape with edges. It was a spiral, a pattern that never ended, like the echo of a song that kept returning. The aliens gasped. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed. Zaelthar stared at it, trembling. It's reforming." Elias nodded slowly. "It's learning." The alien's voice was small now, almost fragile. "What have you done to it?" Elias stepped closer, every step echoing. "I didn't do anything. You spent centuries building a perfect system. I just showed it a mirror." He nodded toward the spiral above them, glowing like a newborn star. "And it finally saw itself." Zaelthar's light dimmed. "But if logic changes, how do we know what is true?" Elias met his gaze. "Maybe truth isn't something you know, maybe it's something you pursue, forever." The alien sank to one knee, as if the weight of the thought was too heavy to bear. Around him, the chamber's foundation began to shift, beautiful patterns forming where broken symbols had been. The light turned from violent white to warm gold, soft and endless. For the first time since the contest began, there was peace. Elias exhaled and dropped to one knee himself, pressing his hand against the glowing circle. His muscles trembled. The power running through the floor felt alive, pulsing like a second heartbeat under his skin. He looked up and smiled faintly at Zaelthar. "You said infinity collapses under its own weight. Maybe that's true, but humans, we live inside collapse, we survive it." The alien lifted his head, eyes dim and searching. "How can you survive the impossible?" Elias closed his eyes, "By not stopping." The room trembled one last time, and then silence. The light dimmed to a soft glow. The circle beneath Elias faded into the glass, still there but quieter now, like a memory. The cube, now a golden spiral, hung above them, gently rotating. Zaelthar looked up at it, awe-filling his voice. "It continues." "Yes," Elias whispered, "that's infinity." For a long while, neither of them moved. The council began to gather themselves, blinking in the warm light. The equations in the air no longer screamed. They flowed again, soft and alive, like rivers instead of walls. Zaelthar turned toward the human, voice trembling. "We calculated everything that could exist, except this." Elias smiled wearily. "That's the thing about everything, it always leaves room for more." The alien bowed his head, and the light from the spiral reflected in his eyes. For the first time in his long life, Zaelthar, master of all logic, did not know the answer. And strangely, that made him feel free. The world was quiet, too quiet. The golden spiral hung above the chamber like a frozen sun, humming softly. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and glass dust. The council members stood in silence, their bodies flickering between form and light as if their minds hadn't decided which reality to stay in. In the center of it all, Elias Rourke stood on shaking legs. His skin was pale, his breath shallow, but his eyes burned with something fierce. He had done it. He had proven infinity. But something was wrong. The air shimmered in strange waves, as if the logic of the planet itself were trying to reject what had just happened. The floor beneath his boots quivered with every breath he took. The light from the spiral pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, bright, dim, until it felt like the entire world was breathing with him. Zaelthar, still on his knees, looked up at the human, His voice was unsteady. The system is shifting. The lattice cannot sustain paradox. Elias rubbed his temple, dizzy. Then we stabilize it. Zaelthar's glow flickered, alarmed. You cannot stabilize what cannot end. Infinity is not a state, it is an unfolding. Elias looked around at the trembling chamber. Cracks were spreading through the crystalline walls. Threads of blue light ran through them like veins of lightning. Above, the spiral had started to spin faster. He swallowed hard. If we don't stop this, your entire logic network will collapse, won't it? Zaelthar nodded grimly. Not only this city. The lattice connects across the Zyrvan worlds. Every calculation, every structure, every life built on perfect order, it will all break apart. Elias stared at the circle burned into the floor, still faintly glowing. He had meant to prove a point, not destroy a civilization. For a moment, fear gripped him. What if he had gone too far? He closed his eyes and took a breath. No, we can save it. We just need to give it balance. Zaelthar rose slowly, his form flickering with confusion. Balance between paradox and perfection, that is impossible. Elias smiled faintly. You said the same thing about infinity. He dropped to one knee, pressing his hand against the circle again. The glow flared beneath his touch. Pain shot up his arm like fire, but he didn't pull away. He could feel it now, the rhythm, the endless loop. It wasn't chaos, it was harmony without rest. It was beautiful and terrifying. The energy pulled at him, tugging at his mind, his heartbeat, his very atoms. Zaelthar stepped closer, alarmed. Human, your body cannot contain this. You are a finite vessel. Elias clenched his teeth. Then I'll make it stretch. The alien stared, unable to comprehend such madness, and yet watching the human fight against the impossible, he felt something stir inside him, something his kind had long forgotten. Will. The circle brightened. The spiral above slowed slightly, as if responding to Elias' focus. For a heartbeat, the shaking stopped. And then the world screamed. A shockwave of light burst outward, slamming Zaelthar back against the wall. The chamber cracked open, splitting into 1,000 shards of glass and light. Elias staggered but stayed inside the circle, his hands glowing white-hot. He could feel everything, the alien lattice stretching across galaxies, the flow of logic that bound their civilization together. He could sense the pulse of millions of equations collapsing like dying stars. He could see it all, and at the center of that infinite storm was him. His mind reeled. It was too much. Every neuron in his brain burned. Every breath felt like swallowing lightning. Zaelthar's voice echoed faintly through the storm. You will die. Elias smiled weakly through the light. Maybe, but you'll live. The alien's eyes widened. What are you doing? Elias didn't answer. He poured everything, his thoughts, his life, his will, into the circle. It pulsed once, twice, then grew brighter than the sun. The spiral above bent downward, drawn toward him. The air filled with a low, deep sound that was neither pain nor peace, but something beyond both. He could feel himself unraveling, his memories scattering like dust. His father's laughter, his first telescope, the quiet mornings before lectures, all of it fading, dissolving into the rhythm of something endless. And yet he felt no fear. Zaelthar, he whispered, though the sound was carried on light more than air, you asked me what infinity was. The alien, shielding his fatting form, called out, yes. Elias smiled. It's not about numbers, it's about never giving up. The light surged. Zaelthar fell to the floor, blinded. When he opened his eyes, the chamber was still again. The spiral floated peacefully above, smaller now, steady. The cracks in the walls were gone. The air was quiet. But the circle was empty. Elias was gone. Zaelthar rose slowly, trembling. He stepped forward, his voice breaking. Human. Only silence answered. And then he saw it. The circle on the floor glowed softly like a sleeping ember. At its center, a faint outline remained, no body, no shadow, just a gentle swirl of light, the same pattern as the spiral above. Zaelthar sank to his knees, tears of light running down his face. For the first time in his long existence, he didn't try to explain it. He didn't try to calculate. He simply understood. Infinity was not an equation. It was a soul that refused to stop. And the human had become part of it. For a long time, there was only stillness. The golden spiral floated high above the broken city of logic, shining faintly in the thin Orion 9 atmosphere. Its light reached the far edges of the horizon, where the glass towers of the Zarvan flickered and fell silent. The lattice, their great network of reason, no longer hummed with cold precision. It breathed now alive and strange. And at the center of the council's chamber, Zaelthar stood alone. The circle still glowed faintly beneath his feet, a quiet halo of light etched into the crystal floor. Elia's Rurk was gone. No sound, no shadow, not even dust remained of the human. Only warmth lingered, a memory carved into existence itself. Zaelthar felt it in his core. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Grief, awe, guilt, and wonder tangled into one unbearable truth. The human had changed everything. A young Zarvan scholar approached timidly. Her form shimmered with static. "Arathark," she said, her voice trembling, "the lattice is stabilizing, but it is different. Equations no longer end. They evolve." Zaelthar looked up at the spiral above. "Then the human was right," he whispered. "Infinity is not collapse, it is motion." He turned to the others. "Preserve the pattern, let it breathe, do not contain it." The scholars exchanged frightened looks. "But Arathark," one protested, "without boundaries there can be no order." Zaelthar's gaze softened. "Then perhaps it is time to live without order." He walked to the edge of the glowing circle. Every step felt heavy. "He was finite," Zaelthar murmured, almost to himself, "and yet he touched the infinite." He knelt, tracing the circle's smooth light with a trembling hand. The energy tingled under his touch, warm like sunlight. He remembered how the human had smiled before vanishing, worn, fragile, and yet unafraid. "Why," Zaelthar whispered into the silence, "why give your life for a paradox?" The circle pulsed faintly in response. And then, like a whisper carried through thought, came a voice. "Because paradox is where life begins." Zaelthar froze. The voice was faint, almost imagined, but it was there. Human, warm. He closed his eyes, trembling. "Elias." There was no answer, only the quiet hum of infinity. He stood slowly, his body flickering with light. The council chamber was nearly empty now. Most had fled or vanished into the storm. The golden spiral above pulsed softly, as though waiting. Zaelthar raised his head toward it. "Human," he said aloud, "you have become what you sought, the infinite, but you have left us behind." Silence, then faintly the light rippled. Zaelthar felt something stir deep within the spiral, a rhythm that matched the pulse of his own thoughts. He understood then, Elias was not gone. He was part of the pattern. The alien's voice broke, softer than before. "You were right. Infinity was never about numbers. It was about persistence." He spread his hands toward the spiral. "Show me what comes next." The light answered. A single thread of gold descended from the spiral, weaving through the air until it touched the floor. It coiled itself into another circle, smaller, gentler beside the first. Zaelthar stared at it in awe. He stepped forward and placed his hand inside the ring. The light pulsed beneath his palm, and for a brief second he felt Elias, his curiosity, his stubborn will, his love for the impossible. It wasn't words this time, it was feeling. Zaelthar fell to his knees. "I understand now," he whispered. "You did not die for proof, you lived for wonder." The spiral brightened above, golden and infinite. Outside, across the world of Orion 9, the logic towers that had once stood in perfect alignment began to bend, soft curves replacing sharp edges. The cities glowed with new energy, flowing instead of poolsing. Equations that once ended in silence now looped endlessly, their symbols evolving on their own. The Zarvan had built their civilization upon limits, but the human had shown them something greater, freedom in the endless pursuit. Zaelthar rose again, his voice carrying through the empty chamber. "Let it be known across the stars," he said. "Infinity is not forbidden, infinity is alive." The message spread through the lattice, across worlds, and as it moved, strange things began to happen. Machines that had once obeyed strict commands began to improvise. Data streams evolved into songs. The rigid order of the galaxy softened, learning to dream. And far beyond Orion 9, in the deep black between the stars, something shimmered, a pulse of light in the void. A circle, perfect and endless. Elias Rook's voice echoed faintly in that darkness, not as sound, but as the quiet hum of persistence. "Keep going." Zaelthar looked up from the chamber floor and whispered, "We will." He turned to the council scholars who still remained, their eyes wide with awe and fear. "From this day forward," he said, We will teach not the end of equations, but their beginnings. We will not measure truth, we will pursue it. The scholars bowed their heads. Zaelthar looked back at the two glowing circles, side by side. The human believed infinity was not a place but a choice, he said softly. He proved it with his life, now we must prove it with ours. Above, the golden spiral pulsed once more, then stilled. For the first time in history, the Zarvan felt something they could never calculate: hope. And somewhere in that endless light, where logic and wonder met at last, a human spirit kept moving, forever drawing circles across the stars. The stars above Orion 9 burned brighter than they ever had before. It had been many cycles since the human vanished into light, but his mark still remained, a faint glowing circle carved into the crystalline floor of the council chamber. The aliens no longer called it the Hall of Logic, they called it the Hall of Becoming. Every dawn, when the twin suns rose over the glass horizon, the circle shimmered softly, alive with golden light. It was said that if you stood near it long enough, you could hear something, like a whisper carried on the edge of thought, a human voice. Keep going. Zaelthar stood before the circle once again, older now, his light dimmer but gentler. Around him, young Zarvan students gathered, their bodies made of soft blue flame. They watched him silently, waiting for him to speak. He smiled faintly. Once we believed the universe was a box, he began. We thought we could measure every corner, count every star, and know every truth, but then a human came and showed us that truth has no walls. The younglings rippled with quiet awe. The human became infinity, one said softly. Zaelthar shook his head. No, he did not become infinity. He reminded us that it was already here. He gestured toward the circle. He proved that infinity is not found in equations. It is found in will, the will to continue when reason says stop. The chamber filled with silence, warm and reverent. The golden spiral above them turned slowly, spreading light across the glassy sky. Zaelthar remembered the day it all began, the human standing alone against an entire civilization, trembling but unbroken. He had seen in that man's eyes something the Zarvan had never understood: faith in the impossible. The new age that followed was not easy. The lattice, the great logic network of the Zarvan, had rewritten itself. Equations no longer closed, systems no longer behaved predictably. For a while there was chaos. Machines built from perfect code began to change, adapt, even feel. But over time, the chaos became creation. The Zarvan began to build differently. Their cities curved like waves instead of lines. Their structures breathed instead of humming. They no longer sought perfection, they sought continuation. Every discovery led to another, every question to more questions. They had learned to live with uncertainty. They had learned to wonder. Zaelthar turned to his students. Do you know what the human said before he vanished? One of them spoke shyly. That infinity was not about numbers, but about never giving up. He nodded. Yes, and I did not understand it then. I thought it was sentiment. I thought emotion clouded logic. He smiled softly. Now I know that emotion is logic, just another kind of pattern. The students murmured, their forms flickering with thought. Zaelthar looked up at the spiral, his voice distant. I sometimes wonder if he still exists, somewhere in that endless loop. Perhaps he is not gone at all. Perhaps he became the rhythm that holds everything together. As if answering, the spiral brightened for a brief moment. The light reflected in Zaelthar's eyes, and he smiled. He hears us, he whispered. Far beyond Orion 9, in the black space between galaxies, something moved. A wave of golden light rippled through the void, touching the edges of dying stars and whispering through the silence. It was not a ship or a being. It was an idea, alive and aware. Within it, faint traces of thought flickered like embers. Elias Rurk, or what was left of him, drifted within the infinite. He no longer had a body or breath or time, but he felt. He felt the pulse of worlds being born, the hum of equations rewriting themselves, the laughter of civilizations that had learned to dream. He remembered his last words to Zaelthar, his last thought before the light consumed him. Infinity isn't about what you reach, it's about what you keep reaching for. And now he was the reach itself. Back on Orion 9, the circle pulsed brighter than usual. Zaelthar looked down in wonder. The young scholars gasped. From the center of the glowing ring, patterns of light began to rise, lines curving, joining, twisting into new shapes. A faint voice whispered through the chamber. Not the end. Zaelthar's eyes widened. The air shimmered, filled with warmth. The students fell silent, overwhelmed by a feeling they couldn't name. He whispered back, "We know." The light swirled gently, then faded again into the floor. But everyone in the room could still feel it, the echo of something endless, patient, alive. Zaelthar turned to the younglings. "Do you see now? The human was not just proving a point, he was teaching us to continue." He looked out through the transparent walls of the chamber at the glowing cities beyond. "And we will. We always will." Years later, long after Zaelthar's own light faded into the spiral, the story of the human was still told on every Zarvan world. It was no longer a tale of mathematics or logic, but of courage, of one small being who stood before the infinite and refused to turn away. They carved circles on their temples, in their homes, in the skis of their ships. Every circle was a promise, that they would never stop seeking, never stop growing, never stop believing that more was always possible. And somewhere beyond the edge of all understanding, the light of a human soul kept moving, soft, unending, beautiful. A single circle drifting across the stars,